Alright, this is Batgirl 27, and there she is on the front cover. New costume, and I like this costume because it's basically just the hard one. Other than the little ears on top. Well, she's always had ears. She is not deaf, although her disability is exactly what I'm gonna mostly talk about in this video. Because Batgirl, Barbara Oldman, she has been badly hurt. She got beat up in the last issue, and the idea here is she might end up being in a wheelie chair. Because you see, Barbara, she used to be in a wheelie chair because she couldn't walk with her legs because the nasty jokers shot her with a gun. And while she was in that wheelie chair for years and years, she actually became a much more beloved character. She not only became a really layered individual with an enormous amount of tragedy, she also became the greatest representation for the disabled in comics. She was this very, very prominent DC character who was in a wheelie chair, and she never let the wheelie chair defeat or define her. And characters like Batman and Robin and even the Justice League, they sometimes relied on her for help and support. Some people might say that Daredevil is the bigger representation for disability, but I strongly disagree with that. He's meant to be blind, but he has got these magic sonar sensors and ninja training that quickly negate a lot of the problems, a lot of the struggles of being blind. And it makes his affliction kind of more unrelatable. But also he is representation for people who can't see in a purely visual medium, comics. Whereas Barbara, she was a great character, people loved her, and really she just happened to be in a wheelie chair. It often hindered her, it made her struggle, but it was never, oh, she's in a wheelie chair. It was always, she was her own character. But there was always this romanticism about how she used to be Batgirl, but she can't be Batgirl anymore. And it's a lot like that shit in Spider-Man with Emma Stone's. People mostly like the idea because they can't have it. Emma Stone's was rubbish in Spider-Man. And when the Green Gobbler, Norman Osborn, killed her off, she was forever idealised because she never got to live. Same as Barbara as Batgirl. She was never really that great as Batgirl. She had no major stories that people held up as being the best Batgirl stories ever. Actually, it's a lot like The Flask as well, boring Barry Allen. And would you guess, all three of these things have been reasserted. Barbara, she is Batgirl again. Boring Barry Allen gets to be the main Flask. And Emma Stone has her own solo book. And Spider-Man's marriage to Mary James has been undone just because Jose Quesada fancies Emma Stone's more. Fantastic Force as well. The Thing and his blind missus. They broke up in the 80s and they evolved as characters, but now they are like the only marriage allowed in superhero comics. So Barbara as Batgirl, it was like phantom limb syndrome, which might be a wholly inappropriate metaphor to make. People thought that she should be Batgirl just because she could seemingly never be Batgirl. But then we got the new 52, which completely reset continuity. And obviously all these editors like Dan Diddy Dido, who are obsessed with their own personal nostalgia from the 70s. And then there were all these clowns who totally bought into this mirage of Barbara as the best Batgirl ever. Well, the New 52, it presented an obvious chance to reset the character, say she was never crippled, say the Joker's never shot her, say that the killing Joker's never happened. But what we got was much, much worse and offensive. Because you see, there was a third type of person who was obsessed with the idea of Barbara as Batgirl. A certain breed of hypocritical feminist who thinks that a woman being crippled is somehow a horrific blow to feminism and female representation in comics. I'm talking, of course, about Gail Simone, aka the stupidest woman in comics. I've talked about her completely hypocritical standards for female representation in my review of her Elastic Man. Really like that video, I'll link to it down below. But Gail Simone, who argues for representation, she decided to take comics' biggest representation for the disabled and just give her a magic cure that lets her walk again. They had got this perfect opportunity to just wipe the slate clean, but Gail took the most insulting and offensive route possible. She just came up with some bullshit magic science that restores her mobility. And all those people who related to Barbara as disabled, they are just given an enormous fuck you. The character, she is just magically cured of her disability by Gail Simone. Having a feminist character like Batgirl was far more important to Gail Simone than having a disabled character like Barbara. Gail didn't give a rat's arse about disabled people or disabled representation. All she cared about was her own agenda, her personal agenda, her feminist agenda that is built on lies and hypocrisies. In my last video about her, I talked about how it's clear that she thinks any female characters who have suffered are automatically weak because they have suffered. In that video, I was talking about the Wasps from Avengers, who in the 80s, she was victim to domestic abuse. It was a terrible story. Well, Gail Simone hates that character and thinks that she is like the weakest female character ever, despite the fact that the Wasps is actually a really strong female character. It's clear that Gail Simone, obviously, is so shallow and stupid that she thinks that the Wasps is weak for having been a victim rather than anything else. And I think the exact same applies to Barbara. Gail Simone thinks she is weak because she suffered, because she was crippled. She was somehow a weak female character because she was disabled. It's even weirder because Gail Simone actually wrote some of the comics with her being in a wheelie chair, and the first chance she got the clout with editorial, she de-disabled the character to instead make her into what she thinks is a strong female character. This is actually the second Batgirl issue in a row that I've not really talked about the comic at all. But that's because what Gail Simone did with this character is fascinating. It again exposes how much of a hypocrite she is. She took a character that represented the disabled, something she would pretend she was in favour of, and just completely removed them just so that she could instead represent her preferred class. It's just hurtful and insulting to those people who look to Barbara, people with similar disabilities and difficulties, to see this character that they related to, they look to for inspiration and comfort, just be handed a magic cure because a selfish writer wants to remodel them as representation for a class that already has far greater representation in comics. This is a good comic though. I like that it plays with the idea of robbing Barbara of her magic cure, showing her persistence and refusal to succumb to defeat in the face of it, while at the same time, something else that the character has never been seen since Gail Simone, showing Batgirl struggling and overcoming her own weaknesses. Another thing I like actually is the relationship with her father, and it's really well handled. They do it really well because, well, Barbara and her dad Gary Oldman, it's handled really well. It's none of the standard sort of stuff you would expect, having him be like a moaning old man or an unsupportive dad, or even some feminist tripe with him oppressing her or whatever. They have got like a really healthy relationship, and the understanding between them and the way they are with each other is just really well done, really satisfying and pleasant. Great to see stuff like that in this book. This is a really good run. It's a shame it's ending soon. I rate this 7 thumbs up.